Hi, my name is Paul, and this is all the things that people did not tell me about the Canon 550D and the RAW video hack from Magic Lantern. This review is out to show people some of the things that I didn't find in most of the YouTube videos. There are a few that had it, and I will link to some of the other ones that cover things that I didn't because there's no reason for me to go through the workflow. People have made very excellent tutorials on workflow, which I will link to below. When I found out that the T2i could support the RAW video hack, I was a little bit surprised. I thought it was going to be reserved for the 5D Mark II, 5D Mark III, and maybe the 7D. Once I got playing around with it, I realized that I wasn't able to record at higher resolutions for more than maybe a second. So I immediately went on Amazon and ordered an Extreme Pro SanDisk card that supports 95 megabytes per second, and I figured I shouldn't have any issues with that. What I found out while searching the Magic Lantern forums, though, was that the T2i itself is the bottleneck, not the SD card. The T2i can only record to an SD card at a maximum of 20 megabytes per second. This means pretty much any SD card you buy at Walmart or off Newegg, pretty much anything above class 10 generally will record more than 20 megabytes per second. So at that point, no matter what card you have, you're going to be able to get the most raw out of your camera possible. Now that being said, the T2i isn't the best camera for raw, but that's not why we're here. We're talking about the raw that the camera can actually produce. If you do have a high detailed shot such as nature or cityscapes, you're not going to be able to record much more than 960. But there are rare cases when you're going to be able to get up to 1168, I believe, and that's generally when you're shooting inside when you have plain backgrounds. And the way that the hack works is that it crops what you see in the live view. So when you're filming with a 50mm lens, which is what I shot all of this with, a Canon FD 1.4 f-stop 50mm lens. Shooting with a 50mm lens and a 550D T2i, you already have the APS-C sensor crop, which means that you're going to have to multiply 50 times 1.6, which is going to take you somewhere in the range of about 78. You are already filming with a 78mm lens on your T2i. When you add the RAW hack on top of that, since it can't support the full 1080p that your camera sees, that means it's going to have to crop it some more. So generally it's going to double that. So in all honesty, when you're shooting at 960 for the RAW hack, you're really shooting at about 156mm lens when you're actually only have a 50mm lens on your camera. This brings in the issue of shake and a whole bunch of other things that you don't want in your footage. Another thing that this crop adds in is that you're going to see the noise and the grain much more apparently because you're essentially doubling in size the grain and noise that you already had from a okay to poor low light camera. So let's take a look at some of those shots, because all that being said, the ability to shoot in 14 stop RAW brings in some incredible possibilities when it comes to color and color grading. This first shot you're going to see was in a gym, which was an indoor setting like I mentioned earlier, so I got to film it with a slightly higher resolution. I filmed it in 235, so that way I could cut down on the vertical resolution so I could get more horizontal resolution. In my mind, this was a better trade-off because people are used to seeing the vertical cutoff. So like I said, this first part was in a gym, so I could get that slightly higher resolution. And for some reason, it did record continuously. What you're going to see is that it is a usable clip. As you'll see here, the colors are very vivid, but what you will notice in the darker spots is that there is a lot of noise. I'm sure a lot of you have shot photography and used Photoshop RAW to edit, and if you zoom in, you will see a lot of noise when you bring up the shadows. This second clip here, I took of some grass, and this was at a higher resolution, but I wasn't able to keep it going for very long. This is not heavily graded, this is mostly corrected. But one of the things that you will see is that it's very shaky. This is for two reasons. One, when you shoot with the RAW hack, when you process them to DNG files and import them into wherever, specifically for me it was After Effects, it still told me that I shot 30 frames per second even with the FPS override to 23.976. This means that you're going to have to tell After Effects to interpret the footage to 23.976. I wanted to see if it actually did shoot at 30, and the answer is no, because the camera was definitely not that shaky. That's just sped up footage. This third clip here is a shot basically just out of the camera to show you what it is. And if you watch in the middle, there's a frame in the middle that is missed and improperly written to the SD card. That happens occasionally. I've only had it happen to me twice though, so that's not something to worry about all the time. This fourth shot is just another shot at 1168 just to show you some different things. It's not color graded. It's basically pretty much out of the camera. It is much darker than what I originally exposed for though. And this fifth shot was shot at the 960 resolution, which you will be able to get continuous footage for. And it is heavily graded. One thing I did in Adobe RAW Editor and After Effects was I increased the noise reduction significantly, and it looks very splotchy. So what you can see here is that midway through this clip, I actually fade in a less noise reduction one, and I personally can't tell the difference when watching it, but you can see slightly in the top left corner that the noise is more speckly than splotchy. And on the sixth shot here, this was actually taken at 960 and was not color graded very much to show kind of what it looks like coming out of the camera. I exposed maybe a stop higher than this. And then on this next clip is actually the 1168 version of that same shot to show kind of how much information you're losing with each resolution stop. And this next shot here is a shot raw that I color graded, and you'll see some flickering. I'm not actually entirely too sure how to avoid that, but I have seen people avoid it. And halfway through this, you will see the 1080p filmed with CineStyle and my color grading to get it as close as I could to the raw footage. And what you'll see is that the raw footage is much more detailed than the normal CineStyle footage. But you also have to remember that this is 1080p footage scaled to 200% to make it line up. So you are scaling up your 1080p image to match that of an already low scale raw file. Of course it's not going to be as sharp. That's just common sense. What you'll see is a lot of comparisons on YouTube just doing this comparison, and yes, it looks very impressive, but in the end the resolution is much lower. And that's the core of this argument, is the lower resolution graded file more beneficial than the extra pixels? And what you're going to see here at the end is a comparison of two very similar shots, one graded from CineStyle, the other graded from RAW. Clearly the RAW does look much better. But the amount of information that you lose from the cropping, I don't know is worth it. That's a decision you will have to make. It's a good feature to know is there. So the T2i can shoot RAW. It's very good for color, but with the drawbacks of increased noise, with the drawbacks of errant lighting, with the drawbacks of loss of pixel resolution, I don't think it's worth it when you can shoot CineStyle and get a very nice picture from it. Let's talk about some things that people don't necessarily go over when they're showing you how to do the RAW recording hack. When you first install it, you'll actually have to go over in the Magic Lantern menu by pressing the trash can and going over to extra modules is what they call it, and you'll see a whole bunch of different ones. One of them is called raw_rec. You'll have to select all of those, and then you can restart your camera, but it should just automatically show up under the video mode. Go to the video mode, select raw record, and then you can select your settings from inside that menu for the resolution and other features that it has. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is FPS Override. When After Effects brought in my footage, it looked really fast. So I interpreted it to 23.976 with and without the FPS override when I recorded it. So I did a test. I set FPS override, and when I record, if you watch the seconds compared to the amount of frames, it adds up to 24 frames per second while I'm recording. But then I also took off FPS override and did the same thing, and I still got the same amount of frames. So for me, setting FPS override does not make a difference.